Hey everybody! I wanted to talk to you guys about why I got started into figure collecting. So, my first figure is actually this little one. It's this tiny little figure of Sumomo from Chobits. Chobits is an absolute favorite series of mine, and it was something that was introduced to me by my older brother. As soon as I finished watching it, he immediately took me down to the Irvine Spectrum, which is this big mall down in Irvine, and they used to have this anime shop. It doesn't exist anymore, sadly, but the moment we walked in, I found this tiny Sumomo figure and I needed her. And she was about $15, and little old high school Francis could not afford it. But thankfully, I have a very nice older brother, and he bought her for me. So we get to blame him for me going down this path in life. And then the next figures I got were also from my older brother. They're actually from Cardcaptor Sakura, and he bought them for me during my first Anime Expo 2006. So we got our badges, we waited in line for the exhibit hall to open, and then right before the convention hall opened, my brother actually was working for the convention. He was part of their registration staff. And so he came and he had already bought me a whole bunch of presents. So he'd already been there the whole weekend. He'd combed the exhibit hall and he'd found me this set of Cardcaptor Sakura trading figures. And I was in love. And he handed them to me before I even got inside of the exhibit hall. And I was like, "Where did you buy these?" And he says, "Well, inside the exhibit hall, of course." And I knew from that moment on I was hooked, because all I wanted to do was run inside and buy as many figures as I possibly could. And there were so many beautiful figures there. I remember buying this scaled figure of Ichigo from Bleach, as well as a matching Renji. I was a huge Bleach fan. Not so much anymore. I was so excited for these figures. They were all so beautiful, and that's where I fell down the rabbit hole. The moment I got home, I was so excited to start looking up online where they sell more figures, if there were any anime stores near me that carried these products. And I started finding blogs and other articles of people with information about figures, and I was just completely enamored, and just this I knew was going to be my life. Something that happens to every figure collector is we come across our bootlegs. Now, not all the time are we wise and savvy to know when we've gotten a bootleg, and I too have fallen prey to the horrors that are bootlegs. One of the first figures I saw inside of Anime Expo was this big booth that had the most beautiful figure of Mai Tokiha from My Hime. And I love My Hime. I needed everything I could get my hands on from this show. So when I saw this beautiful scaled figure, but they wanted $50 for it. And you know what? I'm a 19-year-old kid with barely a part-time job. I can't afford $50 on a figure. At least that was my thought process. I get home and I look online and I find on eBay, of all places, because little old Francis, who doesn't know anything about figure collecting, is like, "Where should I go?" eBay, of course. So I went to eBay and I found a similar My Tokiha figure for only $20, and it was beautiful from these photos. This person's got to be so stupid. This figure is easily worth $50. They're only selling it for $20. Man, they're so dumb. I better snatch that up before they realize how low they've priced this figure on accident. Turns out I was the dummy and not them. Finally, I got the figure in the mail. Her box was all sorts of damaged. Not only the shipping box itself came damaged, but the figure box inside. It was very obvious that the figure box was damaged prior to boxing into the shipping box, but I didn't care. The figure inside looked great to me, and I was none the wiser, and then I put her on my shelf and didn't really look too closely at her details. It wasn't until later that I found a blog from a GeoCities website. Yes, that is how long ago this was. I found a blog on a GeoCities website, and I wish I'd saved that blog so I could show you now if it even still exists, because this one was the most informative blog I would ever read in my life. And it described all of the details of things you should look out for bootlegs. Now, some of the things that I learned in that first experience were some things that I wish I'd known beforehand, but obviously I didn't. I learned that the base needed to have the copyright information, and this one didn't. It only said made in China. Now, don't get me wrong, guys. 98.9% of figures are all made in China anyways, but they should always have the copyright information written on the bottom of the base. The other thing that this website pointed out, though, was issues with the mold between the bootleg and the original. But here was the best part of this blog. It used that My Tokiha figure that I'd bought as the example between an official version and the bootleg version. So I'm looking at this blog and kind of turning around, looking at my shelf going, no, it can't be. It can't be. Everything about this figure was wrong. The way her hair was painted, the way the lines on her shirt weren't crisp, the way her skirt melded into her underwear, everything about it was off. And I recognized all of those features in my figure. And that's the moment that I recognized I own a bootleg. So obviously bootlegs aren't great. I eventually got rid of her. I did the bad thing. Don't do what I did. I put it back up on eBay and I sold it for $10. I did clearly state that she was a bootleg, but I still perpetuated selling bootlegs. So don't do that. From there, I really decided to go forward in trying to build my collection into something that I could be really proud of. So I set a couple of rules for myself, and that's something that I think every collector should really try and do for themselves. No two collections are alike. There's no rules that any one person should follow. You should have a collection that makes you happy. There's nobody else that you should be collecting for other than yourself. You shouldn't be thinking, I need to own this figure because every other collector does. The only thing that should matter is what you love and making sure that everything in your collection are pieces that you truly feel you can't live without. For me, there are a few things that I stand by. One, I love my favorite characters. If I have a character that's near and dear to me, you better believe I'm going to be buying up a lot of that character. But within that same rule, I try to limit myself depending on the character. For example, I've set a rule for myself regarding any figure of Yoko from Gurren Lagann. She is my all-time favorite character in any anime, in any show. I love her the most. She's the best for me. She's my top tier waifu. So the rule I set for myself very early on was I would collect every scaled figure of her that was released. What does that mean? That means that if it is a pre-painted PVC manufactured by a company, I'm going to own it. My second rule is I don't follow garage kits. These are the unpainted, unassembled figures that are made by fans that you can find often at events like WonFest. I have no skills in painting. I have no skills in assembling, and they're really hard to find. You have to be at the event itself to buy it or have some luck buying it secondhand. I knew that that was going to be too hard of a rule to stick by. My third rule along with that is that I didn't want to include anything along the lines of action figures or trading figures. That doesn't mean I don't have a good amount of action figures or trading figures, but it does mean that there are a handful that I don't own already that I'm not actively seeking. That also includes any kind of dolls or chibi figures or robot variations of Yoko that exist. That being said, I do own Delphi Dream Yoko because she's beautiful and she's still my waifu and I had to splurge. Another thing I personally like to do when collecting figures is I look for beautiful sculpts. If the figure is beautiful and it's sculpted to perfection and the paint is flawless, I might still buy it even if I don't even know what it's from. I will say that has lessened as of recently. I do try and limit myself to more characters that I know, only because my collection has grown so large and due to the space restrictions, there's only so many figures I can collect. So those are just some of my own personal limits. Another thing I always suggest with everybody having a personal limit is making sure you've set a budget. It's an expensive hobby and I don't recommend anybody going into debt over it. Some of these figures are beautiful, some of them are really expensive. It's not worth having credit card debt hanging over your head just to have a couple of beautiful figures in your home. I love to display all of my figures. I don't keep any of them inside the box. All of them are displayed either on shelves around the house or in glass display cases. I have about 11 Detolfs, so my house is filled with display cases. I personally like grouping my favorite characters together. Things like having a shelf that's just dedicated to Haruhi, or having a whole shelf dedicated just to Cardcaptor Sakura, or as I have, a whole Detolf dedicated just to Gurren Lagann. My last personal rule that I do have with figure collections is I am a completionist. That means I love having a complete set. So if a figure company announces one figure, but then here's this other figure that it kind of goes together as a set, I'm gonna get that other figure to complete the set. Sometimes I do have to limit myself with my own completionist tendencies. Sometimes figure companies will release all the characters from a series, such as Fate Grand Order, Contact Collection, or Token Rambu, and my poor wallet can't keep up with all of those beautiful figures. I encourage anyone getting into figure collecting to set your own rules. And remember, rules are made to be broken. So you can have as many figures as you want, or as few figures as you want. You can have all of the same character, or every figure is a completely different character. The way you collect is up to you. My last bit of advice is don't feel that you have to collect a figure just because everybody else is buying it. If you love and can afford the figure, go buy it. If you don't love it, but everybody else is telling you you should love it, you don't have to love it, and you don't have to have that figure. The idea of measuring a figure collection based on how many figures you have, or how expensive they are, or how much money you've spent, focus on what's important to you. Focus on what you love and what you want in your collection, and you'll be the happiest that way. The idea of comparing yourself to other collectors and saying, well, they have more, or their figures are nicer than mine, it really shouldn't matter. All that matters is that you have the figures that you love and that you're treasuring them because they're important to you. That's it for this week. I'll see you guys next week, and keep on collecting.